I've always believed that love, real love, is built on freedom, not constant check-ins, not suspicion disguised as care, just trust. That's what Leonardo and I had. Or at least, that's what I thought. So when he leaned in that evening, kissed me on the cheek and said, "Just grabbing drinks with the guys," I didn't question it. I smiled, told him to enjoy himself, and watched him walk out the door without a second thought. The apartment felt quiet after he left, but not in a lonely way. More like peaceful. I wandered into the kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, poured myself a glass of wine, and let the soft hum of a jazz playlist fill the space. I remember feeling grateful in that moment. Grateful for the kind of marriage where goodbye didn't feel like a gamble. I had no plans, just a cozy night ahead. Maybe a bath. Maybe finishing that novel on the nightstand. But then my phone buzzed. A call from my best friend, Lucia. She sounded giddy, said she'd just wrapped up work early and asked if I wanted to grab dinner. It wasn't planned, but something about the spontaneity made me say yes before I even realized I was grabbing my purse. I slipped on my flats, touched up my lipstick, and stepped out into the warm evening air, completely unaware of what I was about to walk into. Traffic was light, and I rolled the windows down just a bit to let the night air in. The city had that soft glow it gets when the sun's fully gone, but the heat of the day still lingers. Familiar, comforting. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just driving, humming along to the radio. My mind was calm, content. I even remember thinking how nice it was to still feel excitement over a last-minute dinner with someone who knew me better than most. At a red light, I reached over to adjust the volume and happened to glance out the passenger window. That's when I saw it. Leonardo's car, parked across the street. At first, I just blinked. Not shocked, not suspicious. I figured maybe he'd driven one of the guys somewhere, or maybe they'd picked a different bar nearby. But then I looked again, and something in my chest tightened. That license plate, that dent on the back bumper, it was definitely his. I didn't mean to look inside the restaurant next to it. I really didn't. But my eyes moved on their own, like they already knew what was coming. And there he was, sitting by the window. Not surrounded by coworkers, not tossing back beers with the guys. No. He was with a woman, just the two of them, laughing, leaning in. Her hand reached out and touched his arm like it had done that before. And right there, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Thursday night, something in me shattered. But I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, but my face stayed still, like my body hadn't caught up to my heart yet. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease of it. The way he smiled at her, like he hadn't just left our home, like I didn't exist. My pulse was racing, but I felt eerily clear, like everything suddenly snapped into focus. And in that strange clarity, I made a choice. I picked up my phone and called Lucia back. Told her something had come up and that I'd have to take a rain check on dinner. She could hear something in my voice. She asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was. And then I hung up, took a deep breath, and pulled the car into a spot just down the block. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My feet knew exactly where to walk. I wasn't going to wait around for a better time or a more dramatic moment. I stepped out, adjusted my jacket, and made my way toward that restaurant with my head high. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also steadier. This wasn't the kind of thing I ever thought I'd have to do. But somehow, I knew what came next. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want an apology. I just needed him to see me, to feel the weight of what he'd done. Not later, not through guilt, but right there, at that table, with her. The closer I got to the entrance, the louder the world around me seemed to become. The clinking of cutlery, the laughter spilling out the open doors, the hum of conversations blending together. It was surreal. like I was floating just outside of it all, watching myself walk towards something irreversible. I paused by the glass, just long enough to really look. There he was. My husband. The man who kissed me goodbye not even an hour ago. Still smiling. She was laughing at something he'd said. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, her dress snug and carefully chosen. She looked comfortable. Familiar. Like this wasn't their first time. I noticed the way her body tilted toward him, how his fingers grazed the rim of his glass while his eyes lingered on her lips. They weren't co-workers blowing off steam. They were something else. And my heart, oh, my poor, loyal heart, had no choice but to catch up. I don't know what I expected to feel, but what hit me wasn't chaos. It was clarity. Ice-cold clarity. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't even going to call him. What I was going to do was show up. Fully. Intentionally. If he could lie with such ease, then he could answer for it just as publicly. I took one last breath, smoothed down my blouse, and pushed open the door. The host greeted me with a polite smile, asking if I had a reservation. I shook my head and said, "I see my table." He looked confused, but I didn't stop walking. I wasn't looking for permission. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I moved toward them, heart pounding in my chest like it might break free. Leonardo still hadn't seen me. Neither had she. They were too wrapped up in whatever version of reality they'd created for themselves. And then he looked up. For a second, he didn't register what he was seeing. His smile faltered, like he thought I was a ghost. The color drained from his face, and I swear I saw his whole body stiffen. She turned to follow his gaze, slowly, and when her eyes landed on me, confusion spread across her face. She didn't know who I was, not yet, but she could tell she was about to find out. The air between us thickened instantly. I didn't flinch. I didn't stop. I reached their table, looked straight at Leonardo, and then pulled out the empty chair next to him. My fingers were steady, my voice even. And without waiting for an invitation, I sat down, right next to my husband. Right in the middle of their moment. I crossed my legs, rested my hands gently on my lap, and offered him the kind of smile that says, "Go ahead. Try me." He opened his mouth, probably to say my name, maybe to ask what I was doing there, but I didn't give him the chance. I tilted my head slightly, still smiling, and said, "So, how's drinks with the guys going?" His jaw clenched. The woman looked between us, visibly uncomfortable now, her eyes darting as if trying to piece together the puzzle she clearly wasn't expecting to be part of. Leonardo stammered something about it not being what it looked like. I turned to her, calm as ever, and said, "Hi, I'm Leo's wife. You must be one of the many secrets he keeps when I kiss him goodbye." Her expression twisted. Surprise, guilt, maybe a little anger. But mostly, she looked like she wanted to disappear. Leonardo's face was red. He reached for my hand under the table, a weak attempt at damage control, but I pulled it away before he could touch me. That privilege was gone the moment I walked in. Silence settled over the table like fog. He didn't know what to say. She didn't dare speak. And me? I just sat there letting them sit in it. The truth, the awkwardness, the shame. I didn't need to yell to make my point. I didn't need drama. I just needed them both to feel what I felt when I looked through that window. And right now, they were starting to. But this wasn't the end, not even close. I didn't say another word right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough to become unbearable. Leonardo fidgeted beside me, clearing his throat like that might clear his guilt too. The woman looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, and I honestly didn't blame her. She'd been lied to just like I had, though only one of us had built a life with him. I reached for the glass of water in front of me and took a slow sip, savoring the quiet discomfort. Leonardo finally leaned toward me, voice low, desperate. "Camilla, can we talk? Alone?" I turned to him and blinked, feigning confusion. "Why? Isn't this the company you chose tonight?" He tried to whisper something else, excuses maybe, but I cut him off without raising my voice. "You lied, Leo. Not just to me, but to yourself. And her. You're not a man who made a mistake. You're a man who made a choice." And that, I think, is what stunned him most. My calm. I turned to the woman again, offering her the courtesy he never gave me. "You didn't know, did you?" Her eyes welled up and she shook her head. "No," she said, her voice barely there. "He told me he was separated." I nodded slowly, almost with pity. "Of course he did. He's practiced." Her lip quivered. For a brief second, I saw myself in her. Not in this moment, but in the beginning. Back when I believed him too. She looked down at her hands, visibly shaken, and I felt something unexpected. Not anger, but something closer to sadness. Not for him, for her. For the version of me she'd unknowingly stepped into. I didn't come here to destroy her, and I wasn't going to. I came for clarity. For that rare moment when the curtain falls and everyone sees what's been hiding behind the charm and the promises. Leonardo had nothing left to hide behind now. He tried again, reaching for damage control like it was oxygen. "Camilla, please, you're making this worse than it is." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "No, Leonardo, you made it worse. I'm just sitting here." His face twisted in frustration, the mask slipping further by the second. The woman stood up then, slow and stiff, her eyes on me instead of him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know." I nodded. "You do now." There was a beat of stillness, that kind that only happens when everyone's out of words but full of realization. I pushed my chair back gently and stood. Leonardo followed, fumbling to grab his coat, already trailing behind like he could rewrite the night with one good apology. But I wasn't listening. Not to the pleas, the stammering, or the shame he was finally starting to feel. I was done talking. And I wasn't done walking. I walked past the tables, past the waiters who suddenly had too much to do, past the quiet stares that clung to my back like whispers. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I walked the same way I came in, steady, centered, and in control. Behind me, I heard him call my name, once, twice. But I didn't stop. He had my attention earlier, when he lied to my face with a kiss. This was my exit. Outside, the night air wrapped around me like truth. Cold, bracing, impossible to ignore. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. The betrayal, the theater of it, the woman who now had to unravel her own version of Leonardo. But even in all that heaviness, I felt something else beneath it. Something quieter. Something stronger. Like the first crack of light after a long, dark tunnel. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And as I walked away from the restaurant, heels clicking against the pavement, breath steady, heart sore but beating, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This wasn't the climax. It was only the opening act. Because what he didn't know, what he could never predict, was how quietly a woman can burn everything down when she's done asking questions. He followed me out, of course. That part was predictable. I could hear his steps behind me, uneven, panicked, like a man chasing a version of himself he just realized he lost. "Camilla, please, just talk to me." I stopped walking, but I didn't turn around. My voice was steady when I said, "You showed me everything I needed to know tonight." It was strange how calm I felt. Not numb, clear. Like my body had finally caught up to what my heart saw at that table. He tried to spin it, said it didn't mean anything, that he was confused, that things had been off between us lately. The classic script. I'd heard pieces of it before in friends' stories, movies, podcasts. I never thought I'd hear it from my husband. But the thing is, once the illusion breaks, it doesn't glue itself back together with apologies. I looked him in the eyes and said, "This isn't about one lie. It's about how easily you told it." I got in my car without slamming the door, without a single dramatic gesture. He stood there on the curb, still trying to catch up to the version of me that used to beg for honesty. That version was gone. And the silence between us, once so rare, now said everything. I drove home with the windows up, the radio off, and my fingers tapping the wheel with a rhythm I didn't recognize. A quiet, confident rhythm that sounded a lot like freedom. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't cry. I didn't stare at the ceiling asking, "Why me?" I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. If he could live a double life, then I could start building one without him. I started small, checking our accounts, pulling statements, tracing credit card charges. And what I found didn't shock me. There were more nights like last night. Different restaurants, different dates, same man. Piece by piece, the illusion of our life began to dissolve, not with rage, but with receipts. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was working, focused, intentional. I called my cousin Sophia, a real estate attorney who'd always said, "Call me if you ever need to play hardball." I told her it was time. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "I'm on it." Funny how fast people show up when you stop pretending everything's fine. What Leonardo never bothered to ask about during all those years, the inheritance my grandmother left me before we were even married, turned out to be the one thing that gave me full control over the apartment. It was in my name. Always had been. He never cared enough to notice. That's the thing about men like him. They only see what benefits them. Until one day, you show them the fine print, and it no longer works in their favor. By the end of the week, the lawyer was hired, the paperwork started, and the locks were changed. I boxed up what was his, carefully, clinically, and left it with the doorman along with a short note. No need to knock. He'd been texting, of course, calling, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between apologies and accusations. But I didn't listen to most of them. I had no interest in the version of me he was trying to reach. She didn't live here anymore. What I felt wasn't revenge. It was reclamation of my time, my space, my voice. For years I'd been so gentle with his ego, so careful not to make waves. And where had it gotten me? Sitting across from a stranger in a restaurant, watching my marriage rot in real time. Not anymore. I wasn't going to fall apart in private while he fell into someone else's arms in public. No. If he wanted drama, he'd have to sit through the kind I scripted myself. And that's exactly what I was preparing. A table, a guest list, a toast. He'd never see it coming, because the thing about quiet women like me is, we don't shout when we've had enough. We set the stage. We wait for the moment. And when it arrives, we make sure everyone has a front row seat. 2 weeks later, my apartment didn't just look different. It felt different. Brighter. Lighter. Not because of new curtains or furniture, but because he was gone. The air had changed. It belonged to me now. And so did the evening I'd planned. I sent out the invitations one by one. Mutual friends, colleagues, even a few of his co-workers who'd once smiled at me like I was just the wife. Not anymore. Now, I was the host, the woman with the keys and the wine glasses. The table was set with care, white linen, polished silver, and the good glasses we'd barely used during the marriage. I cooked most of it myself. Not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to. Every plate, every seat, every candle lit with intention. My playlist played softly in the background. People laughed, passed dishes, toasted to nothing in particular. And just when the night felt warm and whole, the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check. I already knew. Leonardo. I let the room go quiet before I opened the door. He stood there, face rehearsed, like he'd convinced himself this was his redemption arc. "Can we talk?" he asked. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled at him. "Of course," I said. "Right this way." He didn't notice the glances exchanged as he walked in. He didn't know this wasn't his stage anymore. He was just a guest, and I was holding the mic. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the room, eyes scanning familiar faces now painted with polite confusion. He opened his mouth like he was about to launch into some heartfelt speech, maybe the one he practiced in the mirror. But I didn't give him the chance. I gently tapped my glass with a fork and rose to my feet. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. I took a breath, steady and slow, and raised my glass. "To loyalty," I began, letting the word land. "To transparency, and to knowing when to get up from the wrong table." A few people glanced at him, some lowered their eyes. He stood frozen, the smile slowly slipping from his face. And then, without skipping a beat, I reached behind me, picked up the envelope I had set aside, and handed it to him. "This is for you," I said. "I figured if you were going to show up uninvited, you might as well leave with something official." He didn't open it right away, but he didn't have to. The weight of it said everything. The whispers began before he even stepped back. I sat down, calm and unbothered, and returned to my wine. My guests followed my lead. They toasted again, louder this time. The moment had passed, and he had missed his. That was the last time he ever stepped foot in my home. That was the night he learned, I don't chase, I choose. After he left, the air felt different again, clearer, like something toxic had finally been exhaled. The evening went on without a hitch. Laughter returned, glasses clinked. A friend turned to me and whispered, "That was art." And maybe it was. Not out of vengeance, but closure. I didn't need to scream or break plates or post long rants online. I just needed one moment on my terms. And I got it. Beautifully, decisively, and without shedding a single tear. What no one at that table knew, not yet, was that I'd already started turning a new page. It began quietly. A few late calls with my lawyer. One night we stayed talking after business was done. Then coffee. Then dinner. He wasn't dramatic or flashy. He listened. Really listened. And after so many years of shrinking myself to fit into Leonardo's version of love, I had no intention of rushing. But this time it felt mine. And maybe that's what mattered most. That I finally chose the table, the guest list, the seat of honor. No one handed it to me. No man paved the way. I built it, step by step, moment by moment, from the ashes of what used to be us. And as I poured myself one last glass of wine that night, surrounded by warmth, by truth, by people who actually saw me, I realized I wasn't just healing. I was home.
My name is Lola Parker. I'm 28 years old, and at the time, I was working as a software developer in a mid-sized city. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. A good career, stable income, and a future I thought I was building with someone I trusted. But all of that shattered at a single-family dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration. My parents had invited my boyfriend Eric to join us after I'd received a small promotion at work. Nothing huge, but it meant better hours and recognition for the projects I'd been pouring myself into. My mom made lasagna my favorite, along with garlic bread and salad. Dad was already bragging about me, and my younger brother and his wife came too. It was warm, casual, the kind of evening that should have felt safe. Eric arrived late as usual, eyes glued to his phone. I told myself he was just busy with work, but a small part of me had already grown uneasy over how distracted he'd been lately. Still, I smiled, scooted my chair closer to make room, and tried to brush it off. We all sat down, passed plates, clinked glasses. My mom turned the conversation to me, beaming with pride. Lola's always been dependable, she said warmly. She works hard, she supports the people she loves. Honestly, Eric, we're so glad you're in her life. You two make such a great pair. When are we going to hear wedding bells? Her tone was teasing, lighthearted. But Eric set down his fork, looked at my mother with a smirk, and dropped the words that carved themselves into my chest forever. Don't worry, I won't be around long anyway. Lola's not wife material. The room went silent. The clinking of cutlery stopped midair. My mother's smile faltered like someone had slapped her. Dad's jaw tightened. My brother stared at Eric like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear. Heat rose to my face, my chest tightened, and I felt every pair of eyes on me. But Eric. He leaned back casually in his chair, lips curled in a smug half-smile as though he'd just delivered a punchline. Mom stammered, her voice cracking. Eric, what do you mean Lola is one of the most caring, dependable people I've ever known? She would make any man lucky. Eric gave a short, dismissive laugh and shook his head. Sure, she's sweet. Reliable. But wife material, I need someone ambitious. Someone who doesn't just settle into the same routine every day. Lola's comfortable. Safe. That's not what I want anymore. Then he twisted the knife. There's someone else, Sophie, from work. She gets me in a way Lola never did. She's driven, exciting, spontaneous. She matches my energy. The air went out of the room. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My dad's hand gripped his napkin so tightly I thought it might tear. My brother muttered, "What the hell is wrong with you?" under his breath. I sat frozen. Betrayal burned through me, humiliation heavy in my throat. I had poured 3 years of my life into Eric supporting him when he struggled, sacrificing opportunities to stay by his side, and he was discarding me in front of my entire family, like I was nothing more than an afterthought. But I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Instead, I set my fork down, gently wiped my mouth with my napkin, and said quietly but firmly, "Okay, that's it. Just okay." The silence that followed was deafening. Eric blinked as if he'd expected me to break down or lash out. Instead, I stood, gathered my plate almost by instinct, and carried it into the kitchen. My hands shook, but my face remained calm. That night, in the warm glow of my family's dining room, with the smell of garlic bread still hanging in the air, Eric didn't just break my heart, he humiliated me, stripped away the illusion I had been holding on to. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw him clearly. People say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back, I can trace the threads of what went wrong. But at the time, I thought Eric and I were solid. We met at a friend's barbecue. He was 27, tall, easy smile, the kind of guy who could light up a group conversation. I was drawn to his energy. He liked that I listened, really listened when he spoke. What started as casual chats over burgers and beers turned into long walks, shared playlists, late-night calls, where we'd talk until the sun hinted at the horizon. Eric was chasing big dreams. He wanted to climb the ladder fast, make a name for himself. At the time, I admired that fire. He admired my steadiness. I wasn't the type for grand gestures, but I was reliable. If he called in the middle of the night panicking about work, I'd be there. If he hit a rough patch financially, I covered his rent for 2 months without hesitation. We'll get through this together, I told him, and I meant it. When my company offered me a promotion that required relocating, Eric looked stricken. I can't move right now, he said. I need to stay here for networking. For Sophie, she's connecting me to potential clients. At the time, Sophie was just a name, a colleague he respected. I didn't think twice. I turned down the offer, told myself another opportunity would come. What mattered was that Eric needed me by his side. For the first year, it felt worth it. There were moments I'll never forget, like the weekend trip I planned to a cabin upstate. Just us, a bonfire under the stars, the crackle of wood and the smell of pine. I pulled out a simple silver ring, not an engagement ring, but a promise. Eric, I said, heart pounding, I see a future with you kids, a house, the whole messy, beautiful thing. His eyes watered. He kissed me and said yes, he saw it too. That night I thought we'd built something unshakable. But over time, small cracks appeared. Eric would scroll through his phone during our dates, lingering on posts from colleagues who flaunted their vacations, their designer clothes, their big moves. He'd sigh and say things like, "Why don't we travel more? Life's too short to be stuck in one place." It stung, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just stressed. Then came the comparisons. My buddy's girlfriend surprised him with concert tickets. She just gets it, the spontaneity. That's the kind of energy I crave. I tried to keep up, planned more dates, surprised him with little gifts, brought home his favorite takeout after long days. But the more I gave, the more it felt like I was chasing a moving target. He started canceling our plans last minute. "I need me time," he'd say, only for me to find out later he'd been out with coworkers, always including Sophie. She drove a leased BMW, posted photos of champagne toasts weekends in Miami. Eric would scroll her feed with this hungry look, like he wanted that life more than the one we had. At night, lying awake beside him, I started asking myself questions I'd never considered before. Am I boring? Is stability a flaw? I had built my entire identity around being reliable, dependable, safe. And suddenly the man I loved made me feel like that wasn't enough. I told myself it was a phase, that he was just restless, but deep down a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was only a matter of time before it grew into something poisonous. The night after that dinner, the silence in my apartment was deafening. I replayed Eric's words in my head on a loop. Lola's not wife material. The smirk on his face, the way he said Sophie's name like she was already wearing a crown in his future. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's tears, my father's clenched jaw, my brother's disbelief, and me sitting there small and humiliated at my own celebration. When I finally dropped Eric off at his place that night, he leaned against the car door, arms crossed, daring me to react. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're not even going to fight for us?" I kept my eyes on the road, voice steady, though my hands trembled against the wheel. "What's there to fight for? You've already made your choice." He scoffed, shaking his head. "God, Lola, this is exactly what I mean. No passion, no fire. Sophie would have never let me walk away this easily." That last line stung more than I wanted to admit, but I forced my tone flat. "I heard you. We're done." When he slammed the door and walked inside without a glance back, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I should have cried, but there were no tears left. Just a hollow ache and a strange, unexpected clarity. The next morning, I made a decision. I blocked his number, deleted him from social media, packed away the photos, the ring from that cabin trip, the sweatshirt he'd left at my place. No dramatic speeches, no second chances, just silence. People think heartbreak comes in waves of screaming, sobbing, begging. Mine came quietly, like standing in a burned-out house staring at the ashes, realizing there's nothing left to save. But that quiet didn't mean it didn't hurt. Nights dragged on, haunted by flashbacks, Eric, kissing my forehead when I covered his rent, whispering promises under the stars, laughing with my family at Christmas. Each memory sliced at me, reminding me how deeply I'd intertwined my life with his. For weeks, I moved on autopilot. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I wasn't enough, why being dependable, loyal, and steady could be turned into a flaw. Sometimes I'd catch myself scrolling through old pictures, thumb hovering over the unblock button on my phone. But I never pressed it, because deep down I knew if I let him back in, I'd lose myself completely. One night, lying on my couch with the city lights bleeding through the blinds, I whispered to myself, "No chasing, no fighting. He's gone. I walk away." That became my mantra. And slowly that silence that once suffocated me began to feel like space. Space to breathe, space to rebuild. Little did I know, while I was learning to live without him, Eric's new better life with Sophie was already starting to crack. The weeks after Eric were the hardest, but also the most important. At first, the silence of my apartment was unbearable. No late-night calls, no text notifications, no messy shoes kicked off at my door. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and my own thoughts echoing louder than I wanted. So I started filling the silence. I signed up for a gym membership, something I'd been too busy for during the relationship. The first few weeks were brutal. I was out of shape, lungs, burning muscles, aching. But every time I ran another half mile or lifted just a little heavier, it felt like I was shedding another layer of him. I joined a local hiking group too, the same one I'd once skipped because Eric thought weekends should be couple time. At first I felt out of place, strangers with their inside jokes, their gear, their confidence. But slowly I found myself laughing with them, swapping stories, building new memories that had nothing to do with him. Therapy helped as well. My therapist sat across from me, calm, steady, asking questions I'd avoided. Why did you ignore the red flags? What made you believe sacrifice was the same as love? For the first time, I admitted things out loud, how I'd turned down opportunities for him, how I'd swallowed my discomfort whenever he praised Sophie, how I convinced myself reliability was enough to make someone stay. Healing wasn't glamorous. Some nights, I still cried. Some mornings, I still woke up with that ache in my chest. But there was progress, slow, steady, like learning to walk again after an injury. Meanwhile, whispers about Eric trickled in through mutual friends. I didn't go looking. I had him blocked everywhere. But word has a way of traveling. At first, they looked perfect together, one friend told me over coffee. Trips, fancy dinners, the whole Instagram show. But cracks soon appeared. Sophie wasn't the dream he thought. She nitpicked his posts, told him what to wear, controlled his schedule. Friends mentioned fights, her voice sharp in restaurants, his eyes hollow at gatherings. Then came the rumors of her cheating. Other guys from her office. Late-night networking events. Eric tried to keep up the facade online, but in real life, his energy dimmed. I listened quietly whenever someone brought it up, nodding, sipping my coffee. I didn't gloat. I didn't feed the gossip. But deep inside, I couldn't ignore the quiet satisfaction that came with knowing the house of cards he'd built was starting to collapse. He called me safe, boring, not wife material, but the chaos he'd chosen instead was already tearing him apart. And while his world was unraveling, mine slowly, painfully, stubbornly was starting to rebuild itself. 4 months after the dinner, I was sitting in my favorite cafe laptop open, halfway through debugging a piece of code when an old friend slid into the seat across from me. "You're not going to believe this," she whispered, eyes wide. "Eric's life is a mess." I froze for a moment, then forced a neutral smile. I'm not really keeping track. She leaned in anyway. "Well, it's hard not to hear about it. He and Sophie disaster. She's been cheating on him with 2 guys from her office. Someone caught them screaming at each other in a bar last weekend. She called him pathetic, he called her trash. People recorded it." I nodded slowly, sipping my coffee. My chest tightened, not from hurt, but from something stranger. Not joy, not pity, just clarity. The man who once humiliated me in front of my family was now being humiliated in public by the very person he thought was his upgrade. The stories only grew worse. Sophie posted shady captions on social media implying Eric was controlling. Eric fired back with cryptic posts of his own. Screenshots of their arguments leaked through mutual acquaintances, her calling him a deadweight, him accusing her of using him for clout. Then came the real blow. HR at their office got involved after Sophie accused him of harassment. Whether it was true or not, I didn't know, but the fallout was brutal. Eric's image at work shattered, and within weeks he was let go. No job, no Sophie, no shiny lifestyle. Meanwhile, his reputation with friends tanked. People who once envied his new life now rolled their eyes when his name came up. "He's drama," someone said at a hiking meetup. Always was. I didn't ask for updates, but they found me anyway. And then one evening, my phone rang with a number I recognized instantly, his mother's. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. "Lola," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk about Eric." I stayed quiet, waiting. "He's not doing well. Sophie ruined him. He's broke drinking too much, and he misses you. He keeps saying he made a mistake. We know he treated you terribly, and I'm so sorry. We should have seen how good you were for him." Her words cracked something inside me. Not longing, not forgiveness, just a reminder of how much I'd given and how little it had mattered to him until it was gone. "Mrs. Collins," I said softly, "I appreciate your concern, but Eric's choices are his own." There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "I understand. I wish he'd realized sooner." When I hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time. Once I would have bent over backward for Eric, for his comfort, his future, his family. Now I felt nothing but distance. His downfall wasn't my victory. It was just justice. And as his world collapsed, mine continued to grow sturdier, steadier, more my own. By the 7th month, Eric had gone from silent to relentless. It started with a text from an unknown number. "Lola, it's me. Can we talk? I miss our chats." I deleted it. The next day, another "I know I hurt you. Sophie was a mistake. Please just coffee." I ignored it again. Then came the calls. Voicemails that started tearful evolved into manipulative and sometimes turned bitter. "Lola, you were the only one who ever understood me. I threw that away and I hate myself for it." The next day, "You can't just pretend what we had wasn't real. Stop being so cold." And another "God, you're pathetic. No wonder Sophie thought I deserved better." The whiplash was exhausting, but I never once responded. Until one evening at the gym. I was halfway through a set of squats when I saw him. Standing near the entrance, thinner than before, dark circles under his eyes, clutching a water bottle like a lifeline. Lola, he called softly, approaching. I set the bar back on the rack, wiped sweat from my face, and forced my voice even. What do you want? He looked at me, eyes pleading. 5 minutes, please, just 5. Against my better judgment, I let him speak. I was scared, he said, words tumbling out. You were so safe, so steady, it felt like a trap. Sophie, she was chaos. I thought that was excitement, but she destroyed me. You were home. I see that now. Let's start over. I stared at him, remembering every sacrifice, every moment he made me feel like I wasn't enough. And then I remembered my mother's tears at that dinner. You said I wasn't wife material, I said quietly, in front of my family. His face flushed. That was stupid. I was trying to push you away because I was scared. Look at me now, alone, broke. Everyone's turned against me. You win, Lola. Just come back. That word win was like poison, as if this were some game and my worth was proven only by his downfall. I shook my head, grabbed my gym bag, and walked away. His voice cracked behind me. You're heartless. You think you're better than me. But I didn't turn back. The messages kept coming. His best friend ambushed me at a cafe. Lola. He cries every night. Give him another chance. His mother called again, guilt dripping from her voice. Don't throw away 3 years over one mistake. He needs you. But I was done being cast as his safety net. The more desperate he became, the clearer I saw he didn't want me. He wanted the stability I gave him. The stability he once called boring. And I would never let him take it from me again. 10 months after that dinner, I almost didn't go to the wedding. It was for an old mutual friend, and I worried Eric might be there. The thought of another scene, another round of humiliation, made me hesitate. But something inside me whispered, you've earned the right to show up for yourself. So I went. The venue was a garden strung with lights, laughter bubbling in the air. I wore a navy dress, simple but elegant, and beside me was Daniel, my new boyfriend. A graphic designer, grounded funny, in a quiet way, ambitious, without being flashy. He held my hand gently but firmly, as though he knew exactly what this night might bring. And of course he was there. I spotted Eric across the courtyard, slouched in a chair, suit rumpled eyes, darting nervously around the room. He looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken, like someone had deflated all that arrogance he once carried. He noticed me almost immediately. His gaze locked onto Daniel's hand around mine, then back to my face, and before I could turn away, he was standing in front of me. Lola, he said, voice low, urgent. You look amazing. His eyes flicked to Daniel. Can we talk privately? Daniel gave my hand a squeeze, offering silent strength. I didn't move. This isn't the time, I said firmly. Eric ignored that, leaning closer. I realize now you were the one. Sophie destroyed me, but it woke me up. I want us back. Please. His words tumbled out, desperate, heavy with need. For a moment I saw him as he was not a villain, not even a partner, just a man clinging to the last thing he thought could save him. But I wasn't his lifeline anymore. I shook my head. Eric, that chapter's closed. I've built something real, my career, my peace, my life. And Daniel is part of that now. You're not. His face twisted, half grief, half anger. So that's it. You replaced me already, after everything we had. I met his eyes, calm, steady. You replaced yourself the night you humiliated me in front of my family. I just finally believed you. Gasps and whispers rose around us. I didn't care. I turned Daniel's hand warm in mine and walked away. Behind me I heard nothing. No footsteps, no pleading. Just silence. Later that night, under the string lights, Daniel spun me into laughter on the dance floor. Friends cheered, music swelled, and for the first time in years, I felt light, free. Eric slipped out early, humiliated. No one rushed after him. And me, I didn't look back. Because for once, my story wasn't about being dependable for someone else, it was about being strong for myself. If you're watching this, Eric, thank you for leaving. Because in losing you, I found me. My name is Irene Betts. I'm 29 years old, and I learned the hard way that love doesn't always die in a fiery argument. Sometimes it dies slowly, drowned out by comparisons whispered over wine glasses and scrolled across phone screens. The first time Chris compared me to someone else, I laughed it off. We were at a friend's party, the air thick with the smell of grilled steaks and spilled beer. Jade, Sarah's wife, was at the grill, flipping food with one hand and gesturing dramatically with the other, as she told some story about closing another huge deal at her firm. Everyone's attention was on her. She had that natural commanding energy that filled every corner of the backyard. Chris nudged me with his elbow, his eyes fixed on her. God, look at Jade. She just has this presence, you know. Sarah says she's already up for another promotion. Irene, when are you going to go for a promotion at your job? He said it with a crooked smile, his tone light, almost playful, like it was nothing, like it was just a casual question. I squeezed his hand, forcing a chuckle. I'm pretty happy where I'm at, Chris. My team's solid. My hours let me actually spend time with you. Isn't that worth something? He hummed a sound that wasn't quite agreement, wasn't quite dismissal. And then almost absently, his gaze drifted back to Jade. It was such a small moment. A flicker, really. I told myself not to make a big deal of it. But I felt something in my stomach tighten, a warning bell muffled under the laughter of our friends. At first, the comments came like drops of rain, occasional, easy to ignore. We'd be watching a movie, and a character would pull up in some sleek, ridiculous car. Chris would sigh and say, "That's the kind of car Jade drives. Must be nice, huh?" Then he'd pat my knee like that softened the sting. Or I'd spend an entire Saturday drilling holes in our balcony wall, setting up the floating shelves he wanted for his plants. When he came home, instead of the excitement I expected, he'd glance once and say, "Oh, Sarah mentioned Jade just hired a professional decorator for their place. Money's no object for them. It's probably going to be in a magazine." Every time my efforts felt smaller, cheaper, like my love was constantly being measured against Jade's salary slip and found wanting. But I loved Chris. I told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded, that it was just idle chatter, harmless observations. I wanted to believe that. What I didn't realize was that comparisons, when repeated, start to rot even the strongest foundation. Still, I tried. Our anniversary was coming up, and I wanted to remind him why we worked, why we mattered. I didn't plan a trip to Bali. I didn't buy him designer clothes or a Rolex. Instead, I booked a table at Il Tramonto, the cozy Italian restaurant where we'd had our very first date. The walls were terracotta, the candles melted into old wine bottles, and Giovanni, the owner, always greeted us by name. I ordered his favorite wine, the overpriced Cabernet, from our Napa trip, the one I'd saved months for. As I sat waiting, heart pounding, I told myself this night could reset us, remind us of the love that wasn't about status or money. Then Chris walked in. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked stunning, sharp suit, new haircut, a faint whiff of cologne I didn't recognize. He smiled, but it was tight, like the evening was already something to endure. "You look amazing," I said softly, pouring the wine. "Thanks," he replied, scanning the room. "This place is cozy as ever." That word, cozy. It landed like a stone in my chest. It sounded small, ordinary, not enough. We talked, but it was stilted. His eyes wandered to his phone more than to me, and then his entire face lit up brighter than it had all night. Not for me, not for us. "Oh my God," he said, turning the screen toward me. An Instagram post. Sarah had uploaded a photo of a diamond bracelet captioned, "Just because. Jade spoils me rotten." Chris's eyes softened with longing as he whispered, "Look at that. Can you believe it? Sarah told me Jade just surprised her with it. No reason at all. Just because." I forced a smile, though my throat felt tight. "That's a lot of diamonds." "It's not about the diamonds, Irene." His voice sharpened, setting the phone down. "It's about the gesture. It's about wanting to give your partner the world. It's effort." The words hit me harder than I expected. Because wasn't this night effort, booking our first date table, choosing his favorite wine? Wasn't I trying desperately to show him he was my world? But he didn't see it. He didn't want this. He wanted someone else's version of love. And in that moment, I felt it, the ghost of another woman sitting between us, invisible but suffocating. That night was supposed to save us. Instead, it planted the seed of the question I'd soon hear blunt and cold. Why can't you be more like her? But back then, I still held on. I still believed love could outlast comparison. I was wrong. It didn't stop at the anniversary dinner. If anything, that night unlocked something in Chris, like he realized it was safe to say the quiet part out loud. The comparisons kept coming, but they weren't casual anymore. They carried a weight, a sharpness, as if each word was a knife carefully sliding between my ribs. We'd be sitting on the couch, half watching some glossy drama on Netflix when he'd sigh. "See that house? That's the kind of place Jade would buy Sarah one day. Big windows, rooftop garden. Can you imagine?" I'd smile weakly, staring at the TV, but not really seeing it. Our apartment was modest, yes, but it was ours. I'd painted the walls myself. I'd hung the curtains he picked out. Every corner held a memory. Yet to him, all of it had shrunk into not enough. I noticed other shifts too. When I cooked his favorite pasta, the one his mother taught me, he'd thank me distractedly, then mention how Sarah had posted photos of Jade's 5-course wine-paired dinner at some Michelin-starred place. When I spent hours repotting his plants, my fingers stained with soil, he'd say, "It's nice, but Jade just bought Sarah a whole greenhouse unit. Isn't that amazing?" Even when I poured myself into small acts of love, Chris's words drained the color out of them, leaving only gray. And every time he thought he was just making conversation. One Saturday, I came home balancing 3 heavy grocery bags, sweat running down my back. Chris was lounging on the couch, scrolling on his phone. He glanced up, then back down. "Maya just bought Sarah this designer watch. Like, just because. Did you see it on her story?" Something inside me snapped. My voice was sharper than I intended. "Do you even realize how often you bring her up?" Chris blinked as if I had spoken in another language. "What, I'm just telling you things. Why are you being so sensitive?" "Because it's constant." My voice cracked. "Do you hear yourself? Every time I do something, you hold it up against Jade or Maya, and somehow I always lose." For a second, I thought he'd soften, that he'd see me the woman who had carried those bags up 3 flights of stairs, who made his life easier in 100 unseen ways. Instead, he sighed, rubbing his temple. "Irene, it's not a competition. I want us to have more, to be more." But wasn't that exactly what he'd turned it into, a race against shadows? A finish line that kept moving further away. At night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the rise and fall of his breathing. My chest felt heavy, my mind replaying every just because gift Jade gave Sarah, every glamorous trip Maya flaunted. I started to wonder if Chris even saw me anymore, or if he only saw the reflection of everyone else's lives projected like a movie onto our bedroom ceiling. The tension between us became a low, constant hum. Some days it was a faint static in the background. Other days it roared so loud I could barely breathe. And yet I still loved him. Or maybe I loved the memory of who he used to be, the boy who once biked across town in the rain, just to bring me soup when I was sick, the man who held my hand in the dark when my father passed away. But that man felt further away with each comparison. I told myself it was a phase, that he was just restless, that if I held on tightly enough, if I poured enough love into the cracks, maybe the ground beneath us would stop shifting. What I didn't realize then was that the ground wasn't shifting, it was eroding, and the collapse was coming. Our anniversary was supposed to be a reset button. I told myself that if I planned something thoughtful, something that reminded Chris of us, of the quiet magic we once had, then maybe the comparisons would stop. Maybe he'd look at me and see the woman he'd fallen in love with, not the shadow of someone else's partner. So I booked us a table at Il Tramonto, the place where we'd had our first date. The walls glowed with terracotta warmth, the candles dripping wax onto darkened wine bottles. Giovanni, the owner, greeted me by name and winked, slipping me the wine list. He knew I was after the Cabernet Chris had fallen in love with in Napa, a bottle I'd saved for months to afford. I sat at our table, heart-pounding fingers tracing the rim of the glass. This had to work. It had to. Then Chris walked in. My breath caught. He looked striking in a sleek new suit, hair perfectly styled, the faint scent of expensive cologne following him. But the expression on his face wasn't excitement. It was restraint, like he'd walked into a meeting he didn't want to attend. "You look amazing," I said, smiling as I poured his wine. "Thanks." He gave a quick glance around the restaurant. "This place is cozy as ever." Cozy. That word again. Small. Insignificant. I swallowed hard and tried to ignore how it landed like a stone in my chest. We made it through appetizers on shaky conversation. He scrolled his phone more than he looked at me. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm, to wait for the moment when the night might shift. But then his face lit up brighter than it had all evening. "Oh my God," he murmured, turning the screen toward me. An Instagram post. A glittering photo of a diamond necklace laid on velvet. Sarah had captioned it, "Just because nights are the best nights. Jade the Great. Spoiled rotten." Chris's eyes shone as if he'd just seen a miracle. "Look at that. Can you believe it? Jade just gave that to Sarah for no reason. Just because." My chest tightened. I forced a smile. "That's a lot of diamonds." "It's not about the diamonds, Irene." His voice sharpened, setting the phone down like a gavel. "It's the gesture. It's about effort. Wanting to give your partner the world. Effort." The word rang in my ears like a cruel joke. I wanted to scream that this night, this table, this wine I'd sacrificed months of saving for was effort. That my entire love for him was carved out in small, everyday acts he no longer even noticed. But my throat locked. I couldn't get the words out. Our main courses arrived. I'd ordered his favorite osso buco, hoping it would soften him. Instead, he pushed the meat around the plate with a fork, sighing. "It's fine," he muttered. But Sarah said Jade took her to that new Michelin star place downtown. 6-month wait list. Probably cost more than this whole night. Something inside me cracked. I set my fork down. My voice was quiet, trembling. "What is it you want from me, Chris?" He finally looked up, and his eyes weren't wistful anymore. They were flat, cold. "I want what Sarah has." His tone was blunt, merciless. "I want a partner who doesn't just play it safe, who doesn't think this." He gestured at the candlelit restaurant, the terracotta walls, the very history of our love is enough. The words slammed into me like stones. Then came the dagger. "Why can't you be more like her?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The restaurant faded, the candlelight blurred. My heart felt like glass shattering under pressure. It wasn't Jade anymore. It wasn't an idea. It was Maya, a real person, someone I knew, someone Chris was actively holding me against. I whispered hollow. "Why are you even with me then?" He didn't answer. He just stared, fork dangling loosely from his hand as if the question had never crossed his mind. That night I walked out of Il Tramonto with my chest hollowed and my ears ringing. The anniversary dinner that was meant to save us had instead buried us. And I knew, though I couldn't yet admit it aloud, that something inside our relationship had died for good at that table. The silence in our apartment that night was different. It wasn't the ordinary silence of two people unwinding after a long day. No faint hum of the TV, no lazy chatter about groceries or deadlines. This was a verdict, heavy, final, the kind of silence that pressed against my chest like a weight. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the familiar clutter of our life together. The coat he always left draped over the chair. The stack of design magazines, the throw blanket we'd bought one winter afternoon when it had snowed too hard to go outside. It all looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. His words played on loop in my head, each one sharper than the last. "Why can't you be more like her? I want what Sarah has. This isn't enough." By dawn, the hollow ache inside me had hardened into something else. Not anger, not grief. Certainty. He had shown me who he was, and I finally believed him. The next day, I called in sick to work and began to pack. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't throw things into garbage bags like they do in movies. I moved through the apartment, slowly, carefully sorting what was mine and what wasn't. I folded my clothes into neat stacks, took my toothbrush, my face cream, my books. I left the sweaters he'd stolen from me, the mugs I'd bought, but he claimed as his. I even left the framed photos of us on the walls. They felt like artifacts of strangers. Box by box, I dismantled the life we'd built. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Chris. "Irene, we need to talk." 3 words. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a command. I didn't reply. And for the first time in months, maybe years, that felt like power. When he came home late that afternoon, I was sealing a box of records. His footsteps stopped in the hallway. "What are you doing?" "Packing," I said, not looking up. "Irene, stop. We need to talk about last night." I pressed the tape across the cardboard, the rip echoing in the silence. Then I looked at him. His eyes were tired makeup from the night before, smudged faintly at the edges, his expression expectant. He wanted me to cry, to beg, to fight for us, so he could be the magnanimous one, the forgiver. But I didn't give him that script. "There's nothing to talk about," I said flatly. "You were very clear." He flinched just slightly. My calmness unsettled him. "Irene, I was upset. You just walked out. What was I supposed to think?" I set the box aside and stood. My voice was low, steady. "You were supposed to think about what you said, about how you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't enough, that you wanted someone else." He opened his mouth, closed it, then crossed his arms. "So that's it. After 4 years, you're just going to walk away over one fight." I shook my head. It wasn't one fight. It was the last one. The one where you said out loud what you've been feeling all along. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty. "You don't want me, Chris," I whispered. "You want an idea of someone else. You want her." His chin lifted defiant. "Is that so wrong?" "To want more. To want a partner who pushes for more, who is more. Look at Sarah. Look at what Jade gives her. I deserve that. Entitlement, not regret, not sorrow, just entitlement." And in that moment, the last piece of me that wanted to fight for him dissolved. I picked up a box and carried it to the door. He followed, voice rising now. "So that's it. You're just going to run away." I stopped turning to face him one final time. My words came out like a closing door. I'm not running away, Chris. I'm walking away. There's a difference. Then I left. The latch clicked softly behind me, quieter than a slammed door, but infinitely more final. That night, I slept on a friend's couch, surrounded by boxes that smelled like my old life. For the first time in years, I fell asleep not with tears, but with silence. A silence that belonged to me. The first week after leaving, Chris passed in a blur of cardboard and cheap takeout containers. I crashed on my friend Nia's couch, my boxes stacked like silent witnesses in the corner. Every night as I lay staring at her ceiling, I expected the pain to consume me, the sobbing breakdowns, the desperate urge to call him back. But it didn't come. What I felt was quiet or stranger. A dull ache, yes, but beneath it a slow burning clarity. Without Chris's constant comparisons humming in the background, I could finally hear my own thoughts again. And for the first time in months, they weren't laced with shame. By the second week, I'd found a short-term lease, a tiny one-bedroom with peeling paint, and a fridge that rattled like an old train. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. But when I slid the key into the lock for the first time, I realized something shocking. It was mine. I unpacked slowly, filling the shelves with my books, tucking blankets into corners, setting up my plants on the windowsill. Each small choice felt like reclaiming something Chris had drained out of me. The silence here wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was freedom. I threw myself into routines that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. I joined a gym not to sculpt myself into someone else's fantasy, but to feel my own body grow stronger. Each drop of sweat on the treadmill felt like proof I was still here, still mine. I started walking home from work instead of taking the bus earbuds in, letting music fill the spaces Chris's criticisms had once occupied. Even at work, I felt a shift. Without his voice in my head reducing everything I did to not enough, I realized I actually liked my job. My projects mattered. My team respected me. I had always been competent. I just hadn't been allowed to believe it. Meanwhile, word about Chris traveled faster than I expected. Mutual friends reached out cautiously, testing the waters. One night I got a text from Nia. Saw Chris with someone new. Finance guy. Flashy, total show-off. Another text a week later. Maya says his name's Derek. Expensive suits, loud laugh. The kind of guy who orders the most expensive bottle just to prove he can. I stared at the screen, a hollow laugh slipping out. Of course, Chris hadn't changed. He'd just swapped me out for a shinier version of the life he thought he deserved. But deep down, I already knew how this story would play out. Because men like Derek weren't jade. They weren't generous. They weren't truly successful. They were loud, brittle, and quick to show their teeth. Chris had left comfort for chaos, and chaos was about to teach him a lesson. One evening after a late workout, I found myself scrolling through old photos. There we were on the balcony laughing as we painted flower pots. There we were at the beach, sunburned and giddy. I expected to feel grief, but instead I felt distance, like I was looking at actors playing us in a movie I'd once loved but no longer recognized. And somewhere in the middle of those photos, a realization bloomed. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the woman I'd been with him, the one who thought love meant endlessly proving she was enough. But that woman was gone now, and I wasn't going to resurrect her. Nia noticed the change before I did. "You're lighter," she said one Saturday morning as we drank coffee on her balcony. "Like you've been carrying bricks for years," and finally put them down. I smiled, wrapping my hands around the mug. Maybe I finally realized they weren't my bricks to carry. She grinned. "That's my girl." For the first time in a long time, I believed her. Of course, Chris wasn't done with me yet. People like him never are. But before he came crawling back, karma was already circling. And I would hear about it in brutal, delicious detail. It started with whispers. A text from Nia lit up my phone one Thursday night. "You didn't hear this from me, but I saw Chris and Derek at the Oak Room. It was brutal." I stared at the screen, heart thudding with a mix of dread and something darker anticipation. Her second message came fast. Derek spent the whole night bragging about his investments, but his jokes were cutting. He mocked Chris's drink order, talked over him, even made a comment about his shirt being off the rack. I swear Chris's face just crumpled. He looked so small. I read the words 3 times, my chest tightening with something sharp and ironic. This was the life Chris thought he wanted. This was the more he'd traded me for. Not comfort, not kindness, but cruelty wrapped in expensive fabric. Over the next few weeks, updates trickled in like dispatches from a battlefield I no longer had to fight on. Another friend messaged me after a group dinner. Derek snapped at him in front of everyone. Said Chris was lucky to have been tolerated this long. People were stunned. He just laughed like humiliating him was a party trick. I pictured Chris sitting there, his smile faltering, his confidence evaporating under the weight of Derek's contempt. And instead of pity, I felt a cold, steady satisfaction. He had measured me against others until I was nothing. Now, he was the one being measured and found wanting. The final blow came faster than even I expected. One morning, as I sipped coffee in my quiet apartment, Nia sent a string of texts that made me set the mug down, my hands trembling slightly. Update: Derek dumped him. Told Chris he was high maintenance and not worth the effort. I laughed out loud, sharp, breathless. The irony was almost too perfect. He had left me because I wasn't enough. He had begged for more, and now the man he thought was more had discarded him like a cheap trinket. High maintenance, not worth the effort. The very words Chris had thrown at me in softer, subtler ways, words that had hollowed me out. Now they were his. That same night, my phone buzzed at 1:17 a.m. Irene, I think I made a huge mistake. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, the glow casting shadows on my wall. For months, I had imagined this text. I thought I would feel triumphant or vindicated, or at the very least curious. But I felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, just emptiness. I deleted it. Days later, a voicemail arrived. His voice was thick with tears, shaky and dramatic. Irene, please. He was awful. You were right about everything. I'm so sorry. I just need to hear your voice. Please call me back. I listened once, then erased it. Because I knew what he was really sorry for, not the way he'd treated me, but the fact that his gamble had failed. Then came Sarah, the original messenger of comparison. She called one evening, her tone urgent. Irene, look, Chris is really hurting. You need to be the bigger person here. He's learned his lesson. Just talk to him. I let her words hang in the silence. Then I said quietly, his lessons are no longer my concern. And I hung up before she could sputter a reply. The last attempt wasn't a text or a voicemail or a phone call. It was an ambush. I came home from work one evening to find him waiting by the front steps of my building. His face was pale eyes, puffy, but when he looked at me, it wasn't grief I saw. It was entitlement. You've been ignoring me, he accused, stepping into my path. I have. My voice was calm, steady. After everything, you're just going to be a cold bastard about it. I stopped, finally meeting his gaze. You got what you wanted, Chris. You traded up. I hope it was worth it. I swiped my key fob, walked past him, and let the building door click shut behind me. This time the silence wasn't his weapon. It was mine. And yet I wasn't done moving forward. Because karma wasn't just about watching him fall. It was about stepping into something better. And I didn't know it yet, but soon I would meet someone who saw me not as a comparison, not as a placeholder, but as a choice. Summer had arrived, and with it came the inevitable, a mutual friend's backyard barbecue. I almost didn't go. The thought of running into Chris, seeing his face, his desperation made my stomach twist. But Nia nudged me gently. You can't avoid life forever, Irene. Besides, you won't be alone this time. She was right, I wouldn't be. Because beside me was Samuel. We'd met at the gym of all places, not in some dramatic whirlwind, not with fireworks, just two people spotting each other, talking between sets, and slowly realizing that conversation didn't feel like effort. It felt like breath. Samuel wasn't flashy. He didn't own a Rolex or brag about promotions. What he had was steadiness, a quiet humor, the ability to listen without looking past me to something shinier. And as we walked into that backyard, his hand brushing mine, I felt something I hadn't in years. Safe. The party was alive, with chatter kids running between the tables, the grill sending smoke into the warm air. I was laughing at something Samuel said when I noticed the shift in the crowd, the way eyes flicked toward the corner. Chris was there, alone. He looked thinner, somehow, sharper around the edges, a glass clutched too tightly in his hand. His eyes found me across the lawn, and for a second I saw the calculation in them, the same measuring look he used to cast when comparing me to others. But now he was the one comparing. I saw it in the way his gaze darted to Samuel's hand on my arm, then back to my face. And the bitterness hardened in him like cement. He marched over, just as Samuel excused himself to grab us drinks. So this is why you've been ignoring me. His voice was low, venomous. You moved on that fast. I didn't flinch. Hello, Chris. He sneered. Who is he? Another safe choice. Another average guy who doesn't expect anything from you. I glanced toward Samuel at the drinks table, laughing easily with a stranger. His smile was genuine, unforced. The sight steadied me. No, I said softly. He's someone who doesn't ask me to be anyone else. Chris's face twisted, anger seeping through. You think you're happy? Please. This is just you settling because you couldn't handle a real challenge. A real partner. For a brief moment, I pitied him. Because even now, he still didn't understand. Samuel returned, then setting 2 drinks on the table and sliding effortlessly beside me. He didn't glare, didn't puff his chest. He just stood there calm and present, his hand brushing mine in quiet solidarity. The contrast was blinding. I turned to Chris, my voice steady final. I'm not settling, Chris. For the first time in years, I'm seen. That's all I ever wanted. His mouth opened as if to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I slipped my arm around Samuel's and nodded toward the other side of the yard. Excuse us. We walked away together, laughter from the grill filling the air. I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. The silence that followed us wasn't empty this time. It was full of the life I had built, the love I had found, and the freedom I had fought for. Chris had measured me against others until I broke. But now I was finally standing in a life where no one's shadow loomed over me. And that life was mine.